Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is training, and we're going to discuss limited development due to limited movement. So recently I was working with somebody, and they had mentioned that their calves and ankles felt tight. So we did some deep tissue work in terms of like massage therapy and ART stuff, and were able to free up their ankles quite a bit to improve their range of motion. Actually, just like quality of life. That way, their ankles and calves didn't hurt, and their feet and their arches and their feet didn't hurt, and weren't so damn sensitive all day. So it was an improvement of quality of life. But then also, as we were looking at their squat mechanics, as they had improved with the increase of ankle flexion and movement quality, we found that they were able to start to get into a squat position that felt more comfortable than one they had previously used. So this is somebody that I did not work with them in the past in their training. So I was actually just starting to work with them now, and hadn't really gotten to see them squat, hadn't really got to see a lot of kind of full functional free weight style movements. So after the therapy on the calves, and we realized how much their ankle movement was being restricted, I had them do a squat test, and you could see that the way in which they had to squat due to their limited ankle movement caused a very hip hinge dominant style squat. So their torso had to be really, really bent over in order for them to get even remotely close to parallel, which they actually could not get to parallel. Their heels would actually come off the floor if we tried to get them down to parallel. So they had such restricted ankle movement, no matter where we put them, foot position wise, width wise, any of that stuff, to where we could really start to see, due to that limitation in the ankle, it caused a lot of limited movement. And that actually correlated with where they had their most muscular development. So they were missing muscular development, even though this person has a ton of muscle, they're athletic, they're very fit. They were missing muscle in their lower quadricep, so the quadricep down by the knee. Most of their quad muscle was up into the hip. So it kind of made their thigh look like a V rather than like kind of the thickness of the thigh being in the middle of the thigh. So it led kind of like a skinny knee but a thicker upper thigh kind of look to it. And it led for more dominant upper glutes as compared to lower glutes. So due to that poor ankle mobility, in all of the training that they did, they were never going to develop their lower quads and their lower glutes well, because in order to get into movement and positions that would do so, they were limited and they would not be able to due to their ankle flexion. So they would have had to basically break their ankles trying to get into those positions. So of course that wasn't going to happen. So we had talked, and they found out that they had been doing a lot of things that they thought were supposed to develop those areas, but it never really did, and they thought it was just their body's natural response, or the way their body was naturally made. And we found that that is not true. Their body absolutely would be totally fine and totally capable of developing muscle in the areas that it wanted to, if we could get them into the positions that would address those areas. So our goal is to continue to work on ankle mobility in order to improve their positions on exercises that would then allow them to balance out their muscular development. So the reason why this is helpful is, number one, is obviously aesthetics, is they would just look better compared to what their goals were. So if you're an aesthetic-based athlete, so you do bodybuilding, fitness, figure, bikini, all the stuff, okay, physique, all those things. And then wellness is a new one as well. So, but if you're in any of those categories, aesthetic-based categories, and if you're having trouble getting a certain muscle or an area of a muscle to develop, not only should you be looking at these exercises that you're choosing, are they isolating the position you need, but can you even have high quality of movement in that position? So first of all, can you get in the position? Second of all, can you get into it pain-free? And then can you perform any weight-loaded movement in that position? So there's going to be a lot of aesthetic development that is going to be limited if you have movement limitations. Okay? The other aspect of this is a lot of times people will have joint pain in regards to training. So I can't squat because my knees hurt. Every time I bench, my shoulder hurts. Things like that. And oftentimes that's going to be related to not that there's something wrong with them in like a global sense, like, oh, I'm just not made for squats. Bullshit. Everybody can squat. Okay? There's just something about your movement mechanics that are holding you back, and we have to figure out what that is. So when I've worked with people with flat feet, for example, they'll have ankle limitations as well. Then you also run into people with shoulder limitations. So if somebody doesn't have very good thoracic mobility, which is upper back mobility, they're not going to be able to get into a great position for bench pressing that would decrease front shoulder stretch and stress. So by getting them increased thoracic mobility, you can actually get into a better position, which will take away shoulder stress, but it also helps create more stress in the muscle you want, which is the chest. So you can actually improve someone's chest development by improving their thoracic mobility. Okay? So a lot of times we're going to run into pains, aches and pains. We're going to run into aesthetic issues and even strength production issues. So somebody can't squat to their very best if they can't move to their very best. Kind of makes sense, right? So another example is someone who is limited in lower lat development. So they have a hard time getting their lower lat to develop correctly. And that can be caused due to poor chest mobility. So if they have very tight chest fibers and they can't get their upper arm bone to rotate into good certain positions freely and openly, then what happens is they're not going to get into the correct stretch tension through their entire lat belly. So what this means is that if they have restrictions due to their chest, when they go to try to do an overhead type movement and turn their hand in a way that might best normally stress the lower lat, due to the limitation of the chest tightness is going to take away some of the stretch tension, and then it's going to limit the full stretch tension of the lat to where they might only feel their lat in the upper portion up by the armpit. So due to their chest restrictions, they're really only ever going to stimulate their upper lat. They're never going to get the stretch tension down through to their lower lat. So for them to get lower lat development, they would actually need to work on movement quality and tissue health quality of the chest. Sounds kind of crazy, right? But this happens all the time. Okay? Another example we have is if somebody has poor glute mobility. So they don't have very good glutes, okay? They naturally don't use them well. They don't bend much through their hip socket. They tend to bend by just rounding their upper back over. So rather than stretching their hamstrings, rather than like, you ever hear the phrase like when somebody says pick something up, they say bend at your legs, like bend your knees or use your legs. So rather than just like bending over like a question mark and rounding your back to pick something up, we should keep our lower back flat. Actually pivot through the joint connection of our hip and squat down to kind of pick stuff up. So almost like a sumo deadlift kind of thing. That's going to require the hamstrings to have enough mobility to do that, and it's going to require enough positional awareness to use their glutes rather than rounding through their mid-back. You see this all the time, though, be a limitation in people, especially if they're kind of, if they have limited mobility in their daily life, and or they just kind of never develop their glutes well. You'll find that they tend to round over in their mid-back to do something like, for example, a deadlift, a conventional deadlift. So they do conventional deadlifts with a rounded mid-back. That's going to cause their spinal erectors and their mid-back to be pretty damn strong, okay? But they're going to have no butt, and they're going to have no leg drive off the floor. So their conventional deadlifts look like stiff-legged deadlifts, and they have no ass, even though they can deadlift like a lot of weight. And they're eventually just going to cause a bunch of back strain and pain, and they're going to limit themselves in overall strength development because they're never able to actually use all the muscles available. So they end up deadlifting through a mid-back rounding rather than a thigh-based leg drive, driving the bar off the floor. So in people like that, you'll get them, even if they have like hip tilt positioning issues, is you try to say, okay, I want you to bend at your hips and squat down, and you'll see them start to round their lower back. So you tell them you want to arch their lower back inward, like they're trying to push their belly into their quads. they'll say it feels ridiculously uncomfortable, and they'll report feeling like they're scooped in their lower back, almost like they're like, for the lack of a better terminology and visualization, and maybe showing too much of what's in my brain sometimes, is if you see somebody twerking, if you don't know what twerking is, don't even bother Googling that, please. But you'll see when somebody does like twerking or like dancing in a club, they'll like stick their butt back so the lower back is really arched and rounded inward. Okay, this is a horrible example, and I'm definitely should have thought of something else. But they're going to have their lower back arched inward. Okay, so we all know what a rounded back looks like. But you'll see this in women who are highly flexible when they squat. They arch their lower back inward, which is horrible. They absolutely should not squat that way at all. And that's why their back hurts when they squat. But the people with limited mobility in their glutes and hamstrings, they're going to report feeling like they are arched inward like that, when really at best they're at neutral, if not still slightly rounded. They just spend all damn day in a rounded position, so they consider that to be neutral. So then when you try to get them to a straight back position, which should be neutral, it feels like an extreme position to them. So that limitation in their movement is going to cause limitations in their strength and aesthetics. An example was related to their strength in a conventional deadlift. So improving movement quality will help improve muscular development, which relates to aesthetics, which relates to strength production, which relates to reduction of aches in joints and pains and things like that. So it's very important that we consider movement quality when we are considering what could factor into our muscular development. So some examples of things is, like I told you about the person with the bad calf muscles and ankle mobility. We did deep tissue massage, and we did ART type therapies. So I was able to do that on them and help a crap ton to get rid of a lot of their ankle and calf pain, and then get increased mobility. And we'll continue to do that on a weekly basis, and then continue to try to use that new range of motion so our body remembers it and strengthens it, and therefore it stays more permanently. You can also get things done like dry needling. So if somebody has really tight chest fibers, okay, that are chronically tight all the time, what would happen is, if you feel through a healthy muscle, it should feel kind of consistent the whole way. So it has some squish, maybe some resistance to squish, but there isn't much difference in the fiber quality from like one strand of muscle to the next. So it kind of feels consistently kind of soft and mushy. Okay? But when somebody has an unhealthy chest fiber, okay, or unhealthy muscle fiber anywhere else, especially in the chest, if you were to drag your finger, just a single finger, okay, down your chest muscle and go more towards the outside of your chest rather than the middle, you'll feel that sometimes some of the strands almost feel like you're plucking guitar strings. So some of the strands feel tighter, and you can actually feel resistance when you touch them. That is a damaged, flexed, unhealthy type tissue. And then when you're trying to stretch that tissue, it will not stretch as far as it should. And that is what's causing limitations and aches and pains in the related joints. Because the joints are not getting fully stretched evenly, there are tight restrictions unevenly through the joint. So the person in the example of a limited lower lat development, they would need to get therapies done on tight chest muscles. And one of the therapies that works well for those guitar strings is dry needling. So you get dry needling, which is somebody just jabs a needle into the muscle belly, they wiggle it around a little bit, and your body recognizes, holy crap, that muscle's flexed, I need to relax that thing. So it promotes the body to relax a chronically flexed muscle that it almost kind of forgot was flexed. And then when you have increased mobility, you can then do what's called long duration static stretching in order to kind of more solidify the stretch that the dry needling opened up. And then when you train through that increased range of motion, again, you're going to strengthen that range of motion now, and therefore it is more likely to stay healthy. So if we create a stretch and we increase range of motion, but we don't strength train in that new range fades away very fastly. Okay? And or you'll just notice you don't have any damn strength in that range. So if you look at people who do a lot of yoga, okay, they can bend themselves in pretzels, but they can't squat their own body weight. So they're going to be very flexible, but they're going to be weak as shit. So what we would like to have is a balance. We want to be as flexible as we need for the movements we like to do and not have any pain, but then be strong enough to do movements in those positions. So anytime you're increasing a new range of motion, you have to then strengthen within that new range in order to keep it. You have to earn the right to keep that range. You have to strengthen your body's ability to use that range, and therefore it'll have more confidence in that range, and it'll let you recall on that range more and more often. Okay? So, for example, the person with the deadlift issues. We've done kind of improved isolative accessory movements and training movements, okay, therapeutic movements, to get better glute isolation. And then you also do glute and hamstring stretching. Now, it doesn't have to be static stretching. You can do dynamic stretching, and you can even do what's called compression massage. So there's compression therapy in which you create pressure onto a muscle, and your body will register the tension that the muscle is placing against that compression. Then, when you remove the compression, some of that tension will then fade away as well. So it's almost like you're kind of reminding the body that this muscular tissue is tensioned, and then when you remove the thing that's reminding it, the body will then relax it. It almost doesn't even realize it's not relaxed. So there are therapies we use. So I use like deep tissue massage, ART, Graston work, but Graston work is more so just temporary. It gets a person to move better in this workout. And then if in that workout, we can get them into proper positions and better adapt and get muscle changes to those positions, the positions become more permanent and you need less and less Graston work over time. So whereas deep tissue massage and ART tend to be bigger scope changes, whereas Graston is kind of temporary, just helps you move better right now. Then there's compression therapy, and compression therapy works really well on hamstrings and adductors, muscles of the lower body. So it really helps to kind of open up those tissues. So if somebody sits all day, they're going to have chronically tight adductors and hamstrings, especially upper inner hamstring. So we're going to open that tissue up to make sure that that tissue can stretch and glide and slide like it should. So when they squat, they don't have as much lower back rounding. They don't have compensation in rotation of the hip and compensation in knee tension or tightnesses. So they're going to get rid of pain on the inside of the knee or the outside of the knee. They're going to get rid of pain in the lower back. So by using compression therapy on those areas, so for example, we made rollers. So my dad and I have developed weight loadable rollers that it almost looks like we have two different sizes. There's one size that'll fit 10-pound plates. So the roller itself goes from 40 up to 240 pounds. And the amount of tension you need depends on the amount of muscular tissue of the person you're working on, and then how chronically tight the tissue is. So how tight has it been, and how severe is the issue. So we have a roller that's large enough to fit 10-pound plates, and we have a roller that fits specialty sized little 5-pound plates. So that roller, I believe, is like 4 to 5 inches in width, in I guess like thickness. But it's long enough to cover the entire body, so you can roll over both hamstrings at one time. So it just looks like a long tube. And the one that fits the 10-pound plates, I think, is like 12 inches or so. So it's a little bit thicker tube, but that's great for very dense, thick muscles. So sometimes we'll use a small roller on individual limbs or on small muscled people, or we'll use the big roller on bigger muscled people. But those rollers are weight loadable. So the light one and the small one can go from like 10 up to 80 pounds. The other one goes from 40 to 240. So we cover a lot of weight ranges with just a singular pipe. Whereas other companies or products, you need multiple pipes for multiple weights, and it becomes kind of a pain in the ass. It's expensive, and it takes up a lot of room and space. So the rollers that we use, they're used for that purpose, in the sense that if somebody has chronically tight adductors or chronically tight hamstrings, and that's going to cause movement restrictions and or movement pain, you can use compression therapy to get rid of those movement restrictions, and that'll lessen pain and or improve their performance over time, which can eliminate the compensations overall. So there's a ton of benefit to using these therapies, such as compression therapy of the rollers, Graston, ART, and deep tissue massage. Then also just having a better understanding of the correct movements someone should do. So better precision of accessory style or therapy style movements. So finding a more positively, positionally isolative style movement. That way you're getting the exact thing you want, and there's nothing that can kind of compensate or take over or kind of work instead of the thing that you want to work. So getting more experience with that stuff will help over time if you're thinking that maybe this is an issue for you. So why does any of this matter? Number one, if a movement doesn't feel comfortable, find out why. So if you don't squat because your knees hurt, find out why your knees hurt. Don't just give up on squatting. Okay? Go find out why you're having joint pains. You should not have pain when you exercise, not joint type pain. There's definitely uncomfortableness and there's misery and muscle burns and stuff like that. But if the front of your shoulder hurts every time you bench press, figure that shit out. Okay? Look at thoracic mobility. That's going to be a big issue. Look at the health of the chest tissues themselves. Okay? Also, just look up a tutorial video on YouTube on how to bench. Make sure you actually have your scapula, your shoulder blades pulled back and inward. So, you need to make sure your technique is correct, but then make sure that the muscular health related to the joints you're using is healthy. So that way you're not having those aches and pains. Okay? And then also, if you're doing programming, especially if you're an aesthetic athlete, and you're doing programming, and you're like, damn, this program should work to develop XXX, whatever it is. So maybe it should work to develop hamstrings, or it should work to develop your upper chest, or it should work to develop, maybe your lower lats. You have specific muscular areas that you want to work, and everything you're watching is telling you what you're doing is correct, but it doesn't seem to be working. Okay? You need to look at your movement quality. Maybe you're doing the right movements, but you just can't get into the right positions. So some resources you can use, okay? On YouTube, there's a channel called Smash Works. It's Smash, S-M-A-S-H, and then Works is actually W-E-R-X, so We Are X. So Smash We Are X. The guy's name is Travis Bachmeyer, pretty smart dude. He has a ton of crazy movements you can kind of mimic and find and kind of help improve movement quality and get rid of joint-related pains. He kind of stole that kind of format and theme, not stole, but followed along a guy named Kelly Starrett. So it's a guy named Kelly Starrett, K-E-L-L-Y, Kelly, and Starrett is S-T-A-R-R-E-T-T. So you can find both them on YouTube, okay? Smash We Are X, Smash Works, and Kelly Starrett on YouTube, okay? You can find them, tons of videos, all free, okay? Great information. Also, a really good book for movement health and understanding movement qualities the book is called Movement. It's Functional Movement Systems, and the author's name is Gary Cook. So I bought that book. I have 400 books, by the way, of this stuff. So what I did was I went to physical therapists and massage therapists and asked them what books they read when they were in college or when they were learning, and I went out and bought them myself. And then I read through all of them. So it started for me because I had some aches and pains and some muscle tears and stuff, and I wanted to figure out what the hell was going on. So I started going to therapists, but realizing that I couldn't afford to go as much as often as I needed, and I started to figure out better about what felt correct for me versus what they were telling me. So most physical therapists and massage therapists work with general health people, okay, who don't try to squat 500, 600 pounds, don't try to deadlift 600, 700 pounds. They're not trying to bench 400. So most of the advice they gave me was, to be very honest, complete bullshit in the sense that it was useless. So it was like, oh, go do this passive, boring ass thing that didn't really do anything. So I needed more aggressive stuff because I had more aggressive issues and I had more aggressive goals. So I started figuring out, okay, there's an enormous amount of value in what they were saying, but maybe the way that they were trying to apply the information was not correct for me. So I started reading all the books, figuring all this stuff out, and started going to clinics. I started going to seminars, anything I could find. So then when I started learning enough, I started working on clients. So I started working on my clients with small issues that I would learn. I'd go to a clinic and I learned like FMR at one clinic, and I would start to do some of the drills with my clients, and they were reporting feeling so much better, feeling like we have an internal external rotation drill for the shoulders that's really healthy from a guy named John Quint, who does physical therapy at Westside Barbell. So I went to a clinic of his and started teaching those things to my clients. I've even gotten to work on Olympians, so I have actually worked on people in the Olympics, by the way, for functional movements and muscle therapies. So that was badass and tons of fun. I also I went and did seminars and classes. Like we went to a couple powerlifting meets, for example, and just opened up to working on anybody. So I remember one Saturday at a powerlifting meet, I worked on 70 some people. We counted it. It was over 70 people that I worked on in one day. So that's a shit ton of experience. And that was actual, like literally hands-on with each individual. So I didn't just teach a class of 70 people. I literally put my hands on 70 people and figured them out. Okay. And I did a lot of classes like that, a lot of therapies, a lot of events. So it was really, really helpful for me to get more and more experience. So as I learned a thing, I taught a thing, and I got more and more experience over time. So that's helped me learn how to do deep tissue massage, ART, grafting, compression therapy, all these things. Okay, so there's floss bands, there's lacrosse balls, there's a lot of different therapies you can use. And it just took me buying the books, reading the science behind it, and then getting my hands dirty and going to clinics and working with people. So every time I work on somebody, I learn something. I might not even recognize that I'm learning something in the moment, but all of a sudden later on when I work with another person, I'm like, oh man, I remember when this came up and I had to do this before. So the more I've done that over the years, the better I've gotten at it. And that will be the same as true for you. So don't accept the fact that you have to be in pain to exercise. Your shoulder doesn't have to hurt when you bench press. Your knees don't have to hurt when you squat. And your lower back, sure as shit, does not need to hurt when you deadlift. So if you're experiencing those pains when you're doing those movements, you are not moving correctly for your body type, and or you have limitations to your movement that you need to address. Unfortunately, not a lot of trainers can figure this stuff out because they have limited education, formal education, and they have limited experience in terms of who they work with, either the variety of who they work with or the styles of training that they work within. So I've been very fortunate in my life that I've been personal training now for 17 years for money, okay? And I've seen crazy amounts of people. So I used to teach at the university for 7 years. Like I said, I've worked on Olympians in different sports. I've worked on people of a whole bunch of crazy sports, worked on people of various ages, just tons and tons and tons and tons of experience. And then I read all the books I can find, watch all the videos I can find. So for example, at one point in time, Kelly Starrett's YouTube channel, I think, was up to like 600 or some videos. I'd watched every single one. I've watched every single video on Smashworks. Remember, there was a guy named Mark Bell, okay, from howmuchyoubench.net, and he has a channel called Super Training 06. I remember he made a big deal the one time of getting to 1,000 videos on YouTube. I've watched every single video that he had. So it's just get this stuff in your brain. Get exposure to information, okay? And the more you expose yourself to, the more you work within that information, the better you can organize it in your brain and be able to better recall on what you need in the moments you need it. So that's what I'm hoping you'll get through this podcast is you should not be in pain when you lift. If you are, figure it out. Holy hell, don't live with that stuff, okay? You can get rid of those pains. And one of the places you should look is not only technique of the exercise, but also your movement quality. You might have to address health issues in your body before you can even get into correct positions. Okay? Now, if you're having any issues with this, if you think like this might be a thing that's holding you back, email us. Our email is brutalironjim@gmail.com. I'm happy to help. Okay? I'll either tell you what's wrong if I can figure it out myself, or I'll send you to people who I learned from. Okay, I'll get you the resources you need to eventually figure it out. So email us, brutalironjim@gmail.com, if you need any help with this stuff. Okay? So hopefully this raises your awareness to it. Hopefully it gives you some things to consider. And you can check out those resources, Smashworks, Kelly Starrett, and the book Movement, Functional Movement Systems by Gary Cook. Those are good places to start. Okay? Cool. If you need anything, let us know. Email us, brutalironjim@gmail.com. Okay, if you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. Also, if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Brutal Iron Gym. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. The podcast is for you, so we want to know what you want to learn about. You can tell us at our email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. Okay, as always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening. And thank you for watching.